Hey, Crew, thanks for joining the webinar.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we just had a great conversation with Travis and VJ about lights out molding, and I thought it'd be appropriate to have you on to talk about some of the things that MMT does through their Somex division, automation division, in automating. And I know that you have some technology platforms, wide range, right? Portfolio, catheters, and everything, but you also do some work in automating the attachment of a rigid proximal hub to a catheter shaft. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that.
Sure, happy to do so. Yeah, when you're thinking about bonding on hubs to a catheter shaft, obviously there's all the important criteria with the design and manufacture of the mold itself for the hub and the features within. And then the things to think about there is with the catheter going into that hub, you're typically going to bond it in one of two ways. It's either going to be with a solvent bond or a UV-curable adhesive. So those would be the most traditional. With that, traditionally what you have is an operator who's going to be applying the adhesive or the solvent. They're going to be, putting these pieces together in a manual process. But the challenge that you can face with these manual processes is you don't have a really good way to understand exactly the amount of adhesive that you've dispensed to make sure that was properly distributed on the part before you put it in. So you get that operator variability. So the benefit of what our Somex division has done is they've automated that whole process. So picking and placing the hubs, applying a very specific measured amount of adhesive or solvent, pushing the parts together with a associated force, and then also doing the inspection of the part after it's been bonded. So whether it's using vision or a mechanical pull type test, the thing to think about with a UV curable adhesive, obviously that UV light has to get in there. So those would be more of the clear hubs that give you that capability. But for the ones that are more opaque, you have to use more of that solvent type bond. And again, because you can't see what's happening inside of it, having that very reliable, repeatable, automated process is key. And again, the benefit with automation is, it's done the same way every time when you're putting the parts together. But the other thing you want to think about is you do have an operator who's a great piece of automation, right? They have great dexterity of the hands. They can put the parts together. They can feel the forces. And more importantly, they can visually see what it is they're working on. So the thing that's often overlooked when you look at automating a process is you have to account for that inspection, that in-process inspection during the sequence, because if you don't, what you can end up with is a whole bunch of parts that come out the other end and your yields just look terrible because you had some sort of an anomaly happen in the process. So being able to visually inspect or mechanically inspect or do it in a series of different ways is super critical to automating a process and having a very robust and repeatable process out the other side.
Absolutely. Great point. That example you just shared, I assume it's attaching a rigid hub, polycarbonate, ABS, whatever it might be. In MedTech, we love soft materials too, right? Compliant materials because they're compliant. But that can create a challenge in the manufacturing process, especially post extrusion or molding, because of the handling. One is it's tacky, right? And so there's ways that you can kind of reduce the tack, but also the compliance that we want for the application makes it a little bit difficult from a manufacturing or automation standpoint, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When you get into the softer end of the spectrum, things get more challenging. So just like on the catheter side, same thing for these types of molded devices, whether it's like a duckbill valve or small silicone ocular cleaner that needs to have tiny holes in the end and needs to have the flash removed. And like flash is a key piece, like lower durometer, these thinner parts that, you get flash from the parting lines, you get flash off the end of the tip. So that's where we've been able to leverage some of our, our cutting and trimming technology that we've developed over the years to help remove some of that. But things that you have to think about when you're punching a hole or you're doing cutting is this rigid material, this soft material, this compliant material. As you cut it, it wants to move and deflect and deform. And if it deflects as you're cutting it, you're not going to have a clean cut. You're not going to get that square or whatever type of dimension you need. So the type of material you use as a backstop material or a sacrificial mandrel or something that you're punching against or cutting against is really key in the process. Okay. So if you think about these types of parts, like a duckbill valve, for example. So it's going to be, it's going to look like a bit of a pyramid. You need to put a slit right down the top of that. But even something as simple as, hey, I need to put the slit in this part, where it's positioned, how large that dimension is when you go to punch through it is key to the performance of that product when it's done. So once you make that slit and you remove the blade, the valve closes back up as it's supposed to, and it's nearly impossible to inspect that. So doing things like a go no go automated inspection to make sure that that hole is large enough or the opening is large enough. But also once you have it open, now the part can be backlit and you can actually measure the part. You can use vision inspection to see that feature. Similarly, if you need to punch a hole in a part, once that punch in the part has been made, you remove the plug of material. You can inspect the dimension of that hole to make sure your flow rate is going to be correct, because that's typically what it's for. But also make sure you have a very clean cut, because these things are all going to be called out, on the drawings. So you want to make sure when you make these features into the part, that you're not just making them, but you're also verifying that they're correct. And so adding that vision inspection downstream of the automation is a key part of the process.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thanks for the insights, Crew.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. Appreciate it. And thanks for being a part.
All right.